Thank you for coming today. I'm really excited to have you on this webinar. Um, I want to thank the Riverside Medical Charitable Foundation as well for allowing me to do this webinar. I want to be respectful of all of your time. I know that you have other things, on your plate, so we'll just get started. This is Allyship in Action, providing tools and skills for educators to be better allies. So we'll just dive right in. I know at the end there'll be a chance for questions and answers. I'm happy to provide some resources for you as well. So we'll get started. Let's see. So what I like to do is talking about, let's start a foundation, because obviously in 30 minutes, we're gonna not be able to delve really deep into a lot of the stuff of what it means to be an ally and what you can really do on case by case, but let's just get with a good foundation to start with. And so what I like to do is talk about what is the definition of an ally? And that can look a little different for different people, but one of the definitions that I like is from Teaching Tolerance, which is from the Southern Poverty Law Center, also known as SPLC. And what they define as an ally is recognizing oppression broadly and standing in solidarity with anyone who experiences oppression, whether or not the ally also belongs to a targeted group. So of course, you can also be an ally and be part of oppressed group as well, even within that same oppressed group. A new term that kind of came up that maybe you haven't heard is someone called a teacher ally, and this was from the Pennsylvania Center for the Study of Race and Equity in Education, Allie Michael. And a teacher ally is someone who has a strong sense of their own identity, as well as the ways in which their own identities are either privileged or oppressed. And this is really important, especially for educators, because we're dealing with a lot of students who are figuring out their own identities, are coming to terms with new identities. And as educators, if we can have a strong sense of our own identity and how that plays into their identities and intersectionality, it can be really beneficial. So especially with educators, I think being a teacher ally is just as important. So now that we got the definitions kind of set in there, let's talk about more on the ally of what does an ally mean to you? Because it could really mean a lot of different things. And so I put on there, your idea might be different than your fellow colleagues. For instance, you may have one colleague who says, being an ally is someone who is out at the forefront, always, combating oppression, always sticking up for those. And then you have another person who says, well, my idea of being an ally is just being there to support and offering, suggestions. And, if I hear something, maybe I'll say something. And that's my idea of an ally. So as you can see, two different ideas of what an ally means. And I'm not saying that one is right and one is wrong, because we're talking about what I call the ally action continuum. It might be different than what your students think an ally is. And so I'm sure you've maybe run into this, that students, they have a very different definition of what an ally is. A lot of times we'll see students saying, I want an ally who is there for me 100%, knows the terms, knows the definitions, knows exactly what to say, and can really be there for me. As we all know, that's not always the case, but check in with your students to see what their definition of an ally means, because it could be something completely different. And it's good that we're all on the same page. And lastly, what experience do you feel is needed to be an ally? I hear this a lot sometimes with educators when I'm doing work at schools, and they say, how do I actually become an ally? Is it taking trainings? Is it doing webinars such as this? And I'll tell you, it's a combination of everything. It's, self-educating, taking, webinars like this, having other groups come in and do presentations at your school. It's a constant learning. But if you haven't done any of that, you can still self-educate yourself and do that first step into becoming an ally. So don't feel like because you haven't had all of these trainings as maybe someone else's that you can't step into the role of an ally. You really can. It's just taking that first step. And so these are just some common questions and stuff that come up. Now, I've done lots and lots of presentations, and some common concerns that I figured I put on here are ones I hear across the board. The first one is, I'm going to say the wrong thing and make the situation worse. I hear that one a lot. They'll say, Anthony, I have a student, I'll use an example. I have a student who wants to be referred by these pronouns. I'm nervous I'm going to say the wrong thing and they're going to really be upset. And I say that's a valid concern. We're always trying to hopefully, do the right thing. What I'll say is you're going to make mistakes as an ally. I make mistakes all the time. I acknowledge it and try to move forward from it. Um, and sometimes I don't let that stop me from trying to do the right thing. And I'll go back to a student or whoever and say, hey, it's not how I intended it to come out. I'm working on it, but I do hear that one a lot. I'm going to say the wrong thing, and then they're going to really get mad. Also, I hear in that same line of thought that um, why bother, because they're always going to find something to be mad about. I didn't say the right thing, I didn't do this, and they're never going to be happy. And what I'll say to that is, listen, our job as an ally is to try and always do the right thing, and we're constantly learning. And that, if you're comfortable knowing that you're going to make mistakes, keep on doing it. It's going to happen, and you are doing the right thing. So don't let that stop you. The second one on there is, I'm going to be called the PC police, or the politically correct. You may have seen that one online a lot, like PC culture, nothing, you can't say anything these days without being taken the wrong way. And what I'll say to that is, as educators, our job is to try to make an environment as welcoming and affirming as possible. And so sometimes that means having to course correct and saying that language isn't acceptable, or this is why it could be harmful to someone. And so you may be called out as being the PC police, but we're also trying to make this safe environment for all students. So that's a thing that happens a lot, but don't let that stop you either. The next one, I'm coddling students and not letting them experience real life situations. Now, there's some truth to that, because as we know that outside of the school, there is a real world, and that not everyone is going to be as welcoming or affirming to everyone, or want to be an ally or exhibit ally behavior. Um, However, uh, I can guarantee you the students have already experienced that. They have lives outside of schools, and they've seen that. And as we all seen in the digital world, people are able to post their opinions and are not afraid to do that. But the one thing that we can do is try to make an environment that they have, they're coming to school, we can try to make at least that environment just that much more safer and welcoming for students. And so it's not necessarily coddling them, it's saying, hey, they're here to learn, and to be able to learn, they have to have a safe and welcoming environment. So let's create that for them. You know, they're still going to learn real life situations and learn how to cope with that. And that's part of the job of being an ally, is, giving them those resources, which we'll talk about in a few slides. I can't take time away from the rest of my students to help one or a few students. Absolutely, another valid point. There's a limited number of hours in the day, and you have a limited number of time with a bunch of students. And the thing is, I'll tell you, yes, you're right. However, if a situation occurs where someone said some language or someone did something, you can take 2 to 3 minutes just to address the issue, so you don't let it slip by. The students are looking to you as educators to set the tone for the classroom, and also the tone for the school, of when these situations arise where they're looking for someone to be an ally and they're looking to you as an educator, that you just don't let it slide. Doesn't mean you have to take the full time of the class to do it, but just take a few minutes to do it. You can also incorporate some Common Core lesson plans that I'll share at the end, some resources that have been created that can address maybe some issues that have been happening in the classroom. Those are just a couple techniques you can do. And the last one, administration might not offer me the support I need. And that's a tricky one, because sometimes as an educator, you may be at one level wanting to be an ally, and administration may not be there yet. But you can offer administration resources, let them know why it's important to take this stuff important. And also, sometimes bringing in other organizations, bringing in, consultants to come in and really do some, private trainings. I'm also a big fan of, whenever staff get trained on bullying prevention or anti-bias, that administration also gets the training, because they need to hear it as well. So everyone is kind of on the same page. But there are lots of concerns that come up, but these are the ones that I personally have seen a lot come in when it comes to talking about ally behavior. And if there's others at the end that you want to talk about, feel free to ask them. Now let's talk about, when we're talking about allies, there's always like, well, what makes a good ally and what doesn't make a good ally? Well, I could create a list of all the things that an ally could be doing or should be doing, but I just put it down to 4 of them. The first one is, do listen and ask how you can help. And when I say listen, I mean active listening. So that's letting someone speak, just soaking it in and really taking in what they have to say. And then afterwards asking, how can I help you? And as an educator, you can ask those type of questions where you said to a student to saying, how would you like the situation? What in your mind would be the perfect way for the situation to resolve itself? And then follow up with, how can I help you achieve that? And obviously there are some limitations, sometimes students may feel like you can do everything but you can't, so letting them know that there are some parameters, but letting them know that you are there as a resource, and ask how you can help. Do accept criticism thoughtfully. That one can be tricky sometimes because we all sometimes take criticism a little bit to heart, but just know that as allies we're going to be sometimes criticized even with the best intentions, and that's okay. Just take it in. Realize it's not necessarily a personal attack on you. It's just saying, we can always do better and we can always do more. So, do accept that criticism thoughtfully. Do speak up when you hear biased language. So that's another one where people are saying stuff in classrooms all the time, or in the hallways, or outside in the PE field. If you hear it, if you hear it say something, it's one of those things. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily make a big ordeal about it, but students are noticing and they are watching all the time. It may not feel like it because you think they're always on their phones or something, but they are watching. And if you can speak up, and it can be as simple as, hey, in our classroom, that type of language isn't allowed. We set ground rules and that's not allowed. Something simple like that. They pick that up in their ear, and they appreciate that. Do acknowledge intersectionality. So just just like students, we all have different identities and they all intersect and they all play a part in our lives, especially with students. So do acknowledge that a student can say, I am a female student, a student of color, I am also a religious student, and I'm also a queer student. Lots of different intersectionality stuff with their identities there, and that's a lot. And just like we have all our different identities as well and how they play a part in our lives. So to acknowledge that intersectionality does play a part, especially in students, and what it means to be an ally, and acknowledging that. Now, some things an ally shouldn't do are, don't expect another person to educate you about their identity. And it really is a privilege if someone has the time and opportunity to share a part of their identity and educate you on that, because it takes a lot of emotional labor sometimes to share that, especially if someone is feeling oppressed a lot. So if they do have the opportunity to do that, take that as a privilege. Thank them for sharing that. And also, it's a good sense that you've created an environment where they feel comfortable doing that with you. If not, you can always just self-educate, learn more about it. The next one is, do not participate in the Oppression Olympics. Anthony, what's the Oppression Olympics? I haven't heard that before. Sometimes this happens when either someone says, I'm oppressed as this, and someone says, well, I'm also oppressed because of that, so I don't think you should use that as an excuse, or I also have this oppression. And it starts turning into this battle of who is oppressed more, and we never want to get into that. It's not about, well, you're oppressed more than me, so that's why, my needs are more important. No, we're not getting into that battle of Oppression Olympics. Oppression across the board is bad. So what can we do to resolve that? And how can we, help as allies? Don't ignore a situation when an incident occurs. So, that's a big one. It's not, so there's a difference between I'm asking you to solve something versus ignoring it. If you see something happened or you heard something and you choose to ignore it, that sends a really strong message, especially if students are thinking of you as an ally. That's really not ally behavior. You don't have to solve the situation because maybe you don't have the answers at that moment or there's not enough time, but you can still do something. But if you choose to ignore it, that does send a different message across the board, especially if someone's looking to you as an ally. We don't want to do that. And the last one, don't allow yourself to become immobilized by fear or uncertainty. Um, Research has shown, especially from LGBT students, with the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network listens research on the National School Climate Survey, that educators, one of the biggest reasons why they will not stand up when they hear, offensive language is because of a fear or uncertainty, either that they don't have the correct knowledge of terms or what to say, or just that they're nervous about addressing that in the room. But we don't want that to happen. So I have some tools later in the slides that can hopefully help you if that ever happens, but don't allow yourself to become immobilized by fear or uncertainty. There's at least always something that you can do in that situation. So I talked about that tool for your toolkit. One of the things is I always want to provide educators something that they can take with them. And I don't know if Bianca told you, but I am happy to send this PowerPoint to all of you, and also a PDF version so you can have for yourself, because it's important for you to have these type of information. So this is a thing where it talks about, in the yellow part, the structured settings, so classroom, library, etc. And it breaks it down into if you have less time in a public space, so maybe between periods or at dismissal. So this is really for if you hear someone saying an offensive language, you want to practice that ally behavior. So you can say, that is unacceptable in this room. If it's in the classroom and you don't have a lot of time to really go deep into why it was inappropriate, unacceptable in this room. The class ground rules. So that's, I know some schools and some classrooms and teachers implement ground rules where they come up with this ground rules of, in this classroom, these are the guidelines that we follow. And then the last one, leave them alone, is really telling, the aggressor to really, leave them alone. Don't do that. Something simple. But once again, it sends that message for people who are watching saying, they're exhibiting ally behavior. That educator, that teacher is someone who hopefully I can come to. Now, if you have more time or a private space during class, maybe after school activities, you can always follow up with, what did you mean by what you said? And this is really great because it's not as an attacking. Sometimes it can feel like an attack if you're asking someone stuff, but this really comes off as, what did you mean by what you said? And it offers the person an opportunity to explain themselves and maybe do some self-reflection. That was a stereotype, and those can hurt people's feelings. And you can explain to them stereotyping, which is an overgeneralization about a group or people. I wish I had more time to go into the idea of positive stereotypes, which people use all the time, which really aren't positive. You may have not meant to be hurtful, but here's how your comment hurt. And so that goes to what I like to call intent versus impact. A lot of times you'll hear students say, well, I was just joking. Okay, so your intention maybe was to be playful, not cause any harm. However, the impact for the person on the receiving end was very real. And so explaining intent versus impact. So letting them know that, hey, sometimes our best intentions, they still cause impact, and something you didn't think was going to hurt someone actually did. Now, then we have unstructured settings towards the bottom. So hallways, locker rooms, cafeterias. Sometimes you have to, really say, cut it out. That language is not acceptable. That's out of line. Stop it right now. Those address it right immediately in the moment. And obviously, if it comes to the point where you feel like you have to bring in administration or send someone to the principal's office, by all means, use your best judgment. And then the last one was, once again, more time, private space. That was really mean. Why did you say that? Once again, it offers them a chance to explain themselves, but let them know that there was, harm from what they said. There was hurt. And the last one is, do you understand why that was so hurtful? Once again, more opportunity for self-reflection. And part of being an ally is not only educating yourself, but educating others. So if you have the opportunity to educate someone on why what they said was hurtful, that's really good ally behavior, at least in my book. So what can I do? As someone who's trying to be an ally, I can be mindful of the language that I use. And that takes time. When I was learning about gender neutral language, especially when it came to the LGBTQ community, that took time, but I knew I had to be mindful and respect people and the pronouns that they wanted to use. And so just be mindful. And part of that is self-educating. That's what the next one says, educating myself on different issues and identities, because don't expect someone to always educate you. If they have the opportunity and have the time and are willing to do that, that's great. However, part of being an ally is taking the time to make sure that you can educate yourself on different issues and identities. just like this webinar. For those of you that are taking the time to do this, that's excellent ally behavior. Utilize diverse lesson plans that incorporate different identities and perspectives. So at the end of the presentation, I have some great resources from 2 different organizations that offer amazing lesson plans that are free, that are Common Core aligned, that tackle a lot of different issues that you are definitely seeing in classrooms today, but maybe aren't sure of how to address them. Well, these organizations came up with some really great lesson plans, and so I'll share those resources at the end. And the last one is provide opportunities for students to feel empowered to make change and feel valued and appreciated at your school. This is a bit important to me and a lot of people who do this type of work, because we want to provide not only educators with tools to succeed, but also students. And so we want them to feel empowered that they can make a change, whether that's creating a student club, whether that's getting them involved in how they can go out and do civic engagement. There's a really stuff, but if you provide those opportunities for them, it only makes it so that they can thrive just more. So that's really what I want to do. Make them feel that they can be empowered and that they have a voice. Now, earlier I talked about this ally action continuum, and I'll explain this as best as I can, in that being an ally is not static. It is fluid. It is constantly changing and constantly evolving. And so, as you can see from this type of timeline, on this, you have one end of supporting oppression and then the other end of confronting oppression. Hopefully, as we all work towards being allies, that we are moving towards the confronting oppression side. However, we do know that sometimes we're at different stages. So actively participating is towards a supporting oppression. So you're actively engaging in saying, hurtful comments, biased language and remarks, denying, ignoring, saying someone isn't oppressed, ignoring biased language when it happens. Now we're moving towards recognizing. So you recognize that something is happening, that biased language is being used and it's not appropriate, but you're not taking any action. Finally, to recognizing it, but actually taking some action. And it could be something small or something big. And then you're starting to move, as we can see, towards the confronting oppression to educating. So taking the time to educate yourself first and learning about identities, learning about different communities. And then finally, moving to educating others. So now you've taken that knowledge that you've learned and are sharing that with others. Then you move to the last two, which are supporting and encouraging. So supporting others, letting them know that you are there as an ally, as a resource. And then lastly, initiating and preventing. So initiating policies at your school or days of action, and then preventing stuff, biased language when you hear it happening. Now, I call this a fluid thing because depending on different issues, you may fall on different lines on this ally action continuum. Maybe on one issue dealing with sexism, you may be on supporting, encouraging, moving to initiating, preventing, but maybe on dealing with LGBTQ issues, you're still at educating self, or maybe you're at recognizing and just taking action, or maybe you're at the other end and you recognize it but don't know how to take action, and that's okay. Hopefully we're all moving towards the other side of the confronting oppression, but we have to realize that we're all not going to be on the same page, especially on all different types of issues, but hopefully we're all moving towards the same direction. So I like to share this with people, knowing that there's always this pressure, like I have to be the perfect ally, and there's really no such thing, because you're going to make mistakes. We're always constantly learning, terms are constantly changing. So it's kind of a lot of pressure to take on. So if you're able to take a little bit of that pressure and realize, hey, I'm on this journey of being an ally, and it's a lifelong journey. So bear with me that I may be on different ends of the spectrum on different issues, but I'm really trying to move towards the same goal. So this is a really nice tool to use to kind of think about where you fall on the lines on different issues. And some things to consider. Being an ally is an action and not simply a label. I can't tell you how many times I've had students say, I went to a classroom, Anthony, and there was a teacher who had a safe space sticker on there, but when I went in there to try to talk to them, they really weren't safe. And they look at me like I have to be the placard police and go into and rip it off the room, which I can't do. but just realize that it's so much more than saying, no, I'm an ally. And it takes, an action. There's things that you can do. We talked about intent versus impact. So realizing that, sometimes the intention or what we said, that was not how we meant for it to be taken, but that impact is really real. You're going to make mistakes. Language all the time. We think we are saying the right thing, didn't come out right, didn't do it. You're going to make mistakes. Now, it's how you handle those mistakes that really sends a message of where you are in being an ally. You're not taking it personal. You're saying, oh, I made a mistake. I apologize. I'm working on it. Let's work together. Being an ally takes commitment. It's a lifelong journey, but we're doing the right thing. And also realize that with this commitment means that sometimes people may have perceptions about you. They may think that, oh, once again, we talked about that PC police. I can't joke around you. I can't say certain stuff. And that's not true. Friends one-on-one can joke or in a group setting. We're always mindful of who is around in the room and who can hear. But it does take commitment. And I put challenge the idea, not the individual. This is a one because sometimes as an ally, we may want to label someone something when they say or do something. Examples may include, you're a racist, you're a bigot, and so on and so on. But there are ways that we can go across and say that I'm challenging the idea. When you say this is how it comes across. And when you say it, that this is the message that it's sending to me. So what I'm doing is I'm challenging the idea that I do not agree with, but I'm not making it a personal attack. And I can find that to be a very effective tool. So it doesn't make it so that they're feeling personally attacked, but yet you're still addressing the issue. And lastly, change is a process, and not everyone is going to be at the same stage. So realizing that even in your own school setting, that change takes time. You may start small by changing your classroom, and then maybe work towards another classroom and so on. And then maybe by the end of the year, or maybe 2 years, it really changed the whole school climate. Some things take time, and not everyone's going to be at the same stage. You may be the full-on hardcore ally at initiating and preventing, and some of your colleagues may not be there, and that's okay. Hopefully you can help move them towards that, but just realize that we're all not going to be at the same stage, but we can still be allies and still work together to kind of create that safe and welcoming environment. And then wanted to share with you some resources, like I said. So GLSEN, maybe some of you have heard that used before. It stands for the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. And they're a wonderful resource. I've worked for them for many years. And they have wonderful information, especially when it comes to LGBTQ research, best practices. It's free. They have wonderful research on there as well, and also have a really cool tool for students who want to create student surveys. And it's absolutely free. Students just go in there, pick the questions, and GLSEN actually creates all of the digital graphs for them for free. So wonderful resource. Just go to glisten.org. The last one is the Anti-Defamation League, another organization I worked for personally. And their education work is called A World of Difference Institute. And if you go to adl.org/education, you can see a bunch of their amazing resources. One that I like to point out is that they have a current events classroom, which is lesson plans that they created that are Common Core aligned, that are really up to date on issues. So they have lesson plans on how to talk in the aftermath of hate, how to talk about the Me Too movement, how to talk about Black Lives Matter, how to talk about kneeling with the national anthem. So they almost weekly are creating these lesson plans for educators of different grade levels that you can incorporate, and it's absolutely free. One of the big things that I want to share with educators is resources, so that you can take this back and actually use them. It's just sometimes we don't know where resources are out there. So I figured I'd share those with you. And with that, I want to take any time for questions. And so
if you guys
this
have
is
any
my
questions,
contact
please feel
information. If you
free
want to ask something
to
personally,
add them in the chat box. I have a couple already, and some questions that I have are there other specific webinars or in-person presentations that can be provided for school sites or places of work?
Sure. Great question. So I'll answer it in two ways. So I do private consulting where I do presentations for schools, whether that's assemblies or group settings. But other organizations like the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, they actually do really great presentations for teachers, administrators, and students as well. Um, and so I'd say you can find that
Yeah,
out.
that is
ADL does great
great.
presentations.
And
I do
then
them. So
another
yeah, they
question
are.
I have
If you have any
is
questions,
how
feel free
can
to
I
email me
help
and I can kind of point you
students
in the right direction.
understand what an ally is and how they can become one in their community or for peers on school campus?
That's great. Um, I think a lot of times it's, sitting down with them, explaining kind of like how I did, like, what do you think an ally is? And then taking the time to tell them, this is how, whether at the school, maybe your school has an idea of what an ally is and what that would look like in that setting. Um, but just kind of taking the time with them to explain to them, this is what you can do. And I talked about how sometimes there's this pressure to feel like we have to, this is what an ally is, and this is the only way to be an ally. There are many different ways to be an ally, and we can all grow. So just letting them know that there are even little things that they can do that can help them be an ally and help other
Definitely.
students,
Thank
help
you. That
them
was a
grow as
great
leaders. So
answer.
take
And
the time
then
and let
one
them know that there
more,
are little things and kind of help them grow
are
along the way.
there different types of allies?
Yes. So kind of like I talked on the ally action continuum, there are different allies for different people for different stuff that they feel passionate about. I've met people who are really strong LGBTQ allies, but aren't necessarily allies the same way they are on different issues. Whether that's dealing with um, racism or sexism. But there are different types of allies. That's why I use that ally action continuum, because sometimes it's good for ourselves to self-reflect and see, well, where do I fall on the line? Because I call myself an ally, but what am I actually doing, and could I be doing more, or am I not doing enough? So absolutely, there are different types of allies, and I
Well, thank you
encourage
so much, Anthony.
anyone to
If,
look at
like
that
I said
continuum and
before,
see
if
where they
anybody
fall
has any
and what they
questions
can do to do more.
specifically geared for Anthony, his email information is right here. And then I have his PowerPoint presentation, so I can email it out to everybody that attended the webinar as well. So big thank you to Anthony. I'm so happy that you were able to present for our second Take 30, and just hope everybody has a great rest of their day. Bye.
You too. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.